Well, our closing session today is really an absolutely superb panel of startup companies. I think, as we all know, just from reading the popular press, there's an enormous focus today on startups, not just across Canada, but in other developed countries, and particularly the United States, which has reclaimed sort of Startup America as its patriotic comeback act. Realizing that the entrepreneurial communities of many of the emerging economies are catching some of our developed economies flat-footed, and so these young startups are really a vector for infusing the community with entrepreneurial energy. And we have a really fantastic group here today. Mark MacLeod, who's a partner with Real Ventures in Montreal, and Real Ventures focuses on startup early-stage investments in the information technology sector. Much more than that, though, Mark is a real key influencer on the startup scene across Canada, and we're really delighted, Mark, that you can be with us today. Janice Diner is the CEO of Horizon Studios, and she's a new entrepreneur, but a very seasoned expert in social and emerging media technologies on both a local and a global scale. And then I'll go to the other side. Leila Boujnane is really one of our experts in building companies. She's currently the CEO of TinEye, which is a large-scale search engine that uses image recognition to drive its business, and a real leader in the startup community. And on the far end, Loudon Owen has become legendary. He's a venture capitalist. But his most important claim to fame is that he was the chairman of Eye4Eye, which was a startup company that sued Microsoft all the way to the US Supreme Court for patent infringement and won that case. And our session chair today is Toronto City Councillor Michael Thompson. He's chair of the Toronto Economic Development efforts, but most importantly also he's an entrepreneur. And I just, if I may, put in a small personal comment. Although we have the right number of women on this panel, it is very IT heavy. And I think for those of you who are here at Mars for the first time, I just want to say in our community we have also extraordinary entrepreneurs working in life sciences, health technologies, clean energy, advanced materials manufacturing, and social purpose businesses. So this is a slice, but it's only one slice of this incredible cohort of young companies that are going to make Canada proud in the future. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Leila. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Panelists, are you ready? I think we should just get right into it. The first question that I have for you is, what key ingredients must be present to create a great environment for startup companies? And who would like to start? Loudon?
I'm happy to start. I think that there's hard and soft factors, and I think the hard factors everybody knows. Things have to work, and people have to feel safe, and people have to be able to commute, travel, all the basics. I think the soft factors are really vital, which are a culture where people embrace entrepreneurialism. And it doesn't have to be used in every sentence, perhaps every second sentence, but just an attitude from top to bottom that it matters. And I think that starts, early on. It starts in the schools. It migrates through into how people position themselves in their careers. And it's absolutely vital. So you see it from city to city. You see big differences. I mean, what's the difference between Toronto and Tokyo and Toledo? What's the difference? I mean, part of it is size, part of it is attitude. And I think it's attitude. So the one thing that I continue to wave the flag about is embracing, supporting, investing in people that lose money, and that's called startups and entrepreneurs. And then when they make money, embrace, celebrate, and they'll reinvest.
Terrific. Leila?
Well, I would have to say that what we need, and this is coming from a startup perspective and the startup world, what we really need is a number of very, very successful startups in Toronto in particular, and very, very, very large exits. Because what that really, really does to the startup in Toronto is that it provides an example that you can actually be successful building a large company, but upon exit, if you have a PayPal, for example, or a Google, or a very large company that has generated tremendous wealth. What really happens is that it also generates a huge number of engineers and developers and individuals who are actually interested in driving and starting the next set of startups. From my perspective, that's pretty critical to our ecosystem here in Toronto. And the second aspect of that is to legitimize, owning equity, for example, in startups, because a lot of time, most people look at startups as something that's extremely risky, and they don't actually view it as something that would be, that you could point at as something that's extremely successful, and that would be the foundation of your financial as well as your career success. So if we actually bring that forward and it happens more frequently than it used to be, you start looking at it as something that's actually completely normal. And why wouldn't you own equity in a startup? And why wouldn't you look at that as something that would be the foundation of a fantastic career as well as financial achievement?
Terrific. And Janice?
From my perspective, it's been, though I'm a senior professional, I'm running a young startup, and it's been very critical to have vision, support, and mentorship from places like the building you're in, Mars, has been critical in helping us establish and get access to things that we don't always have. Startups come often, the entrepreneur and the immediate team have a set of skills to bring to market, but are missing some of the other skills necessary to grow the business or different parts of the business. And it's been really critical to, certainly for us and the people on my team, to be exposed to other entrepreneurs, to advisors, and people that can help us walk through pieces of the business that we've never done. I certainly, though I have career accomplishments, there's a whole group of things that as a startup we haven't done yet and that we need help with. And so I think the ecosphere of the city and of places like Mars and other startup communities like what we're talking about in Montreal are critical to helping entrepreneurs get going and build what they need to build.
Terrific. Mark?
I would echo Leila's comments. I think the single biggest thing that we can do to build a healthy ecosystem, and the single biggest component of it, is those big kind of breakout winning companies. And you look at the importance of RIM. RIM may be on the downswing at the moment, but look at the importance of RIM in Waterloo. Look at the importance of kind of Cognos back in the day, or Jetform or other companies in Ottawa. And they really do bolster the entire community. And you really see this, particularly in Silicon Valley, where something that makes the valley so magical is the presence of these huge technology giants, because that fuels M&A, it fuels venture capital, deals get done in your backyard. It's all about relationships, and one of the valley's crucial unfair advantages is that all of those relationships and networks are all in that same geographic radius. And over time, it's become this vertically integrated thing. These tech giants need more and more great people, so they get close to the universities and they support that, and that just is kind of self-fulfilling. So it's all about those tech giants, and that's actually the thing that I am most concerned about when I look at the Canadian ecosystem, is our giants were few and they're disappearing.
Thanks, panelists. But let me ask this question. It's sort of a follow-up on the first question. Obviously, the tech giants and the big startups, they don't just happen. We need, obviously, an environment that has talent. In place of Stanford in Silicon Valley, and I would imagine if I look back into history and looking at Detroit, Ford, the Dodge brothers, and so on, in terms of car development, they had talented people. The energy was there, and also you have financial capital. So well before you have this big breakout in these large organizations, how do you kind of look, how do you sort of focus then on creating that environment beyond simply saying that large organizations are going to be the impetus of creating that edge or that ecosystem of growth? I mean, how do you sort of, how do you kind of relate that with respect to real startup? I mean, startups are such that you have individuals with ideas and so on, and you obviously need an environment where talented people are located in order to create that, to develop that very large organization. In the case of RIM, for example, you had talented people there, you had resources, the attraction was there and so on, and that was a good catalyst for development. But how do you encourage that in an environment, let's use Toronto, for example, as our model?
You
like
empty the prisons. And I mean that obviously not literally, but you empty the prisons.
This is very controversial.
I didn't think that was controversial. But listen, most entrepreneurs and people that want to build companies don't want to, they want to create change.
Right.
They don't want to accept things the way they are. And I don't know, there's a classic argument between entrepreneurship being taught, can it be learned, or is it all innate, nature, nurture? But I think it's a combination where you say they don't actually, in the companies we've worked with historically, I would say the vast majority of entrepreneurs that have spun out of big companies have failed. That they've been absolute failures. And it wasn't because they didn't work hard, they were smart, they were well educated, they were well intent, they're usually well funded. The entrepreneurs that I've seen succeed were people who had vision and drive. And that usually builds around, it can be building around a specific industry. So in Montreal, for example, at Softimage, Daniel Langlois was driven. And he had his own vision. And his vision was to have everybody in the world able to create three-dimensional graphics. And by the way, it sounded ludicrous at the time. It sounded insane. But he was passionate. And so how do you create that? I don't know. It's not by having companies that give incentives and bonuses if people start their own entrepreneurship initiatives. I think it's by embracing the culture from the beginning. And you're right. We used to call it the Lamborghini effect, where if you park 3 or 4 Lamborghinis outside, let's say at U of T, and you go to one of the faculties and you park them outside there and you put the names of the companies on the license plate, it tends to get attention from the other professors and from the students. Maybe today it's bicycles because we're more concerned about the environment. But you're right. You get a couple of big wins, the power of one, and then you build around it.
Terrific. Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, it really does start at the university level. I look at our companies are constantly trying to recruit young grads out of computer science, and at McGill and Concordia and other Canadian universities, they're still learning out of textbooks in a 4th year. You look at 4th year computer science in Stanford, and they're building iPhone apps, and they're judged by how well those apps do out in the real world. I mean, that is such a difference, and that creates this culture and this expectation that I, as a young graduate, can go out and do anything and build anything. And in today's world, literally you can. When I first started out in the startup world 12, 13 years ago, you couldn't do anything without raising a couple $1 million. You needed to get infrastructure and buy racks of servers, you needed all these people and licenses, and today there's so much that you can do for nothing, just leveraging open source technologies and the social web. So it really does start at that grassroots, really young level.
Well, Leila?
I was just going to say that we actually have a fantastic, startup environment in Toronto. So we actually have that. So the comment about large companies was more about like when the exits happen, these individuals, spawn a 2nd and 3rd and 4th generation, of startups. You do it once, you can do it a 2nd, 3rd time, you can build teams again, you can actually solve, very large scale problems, and you have experience that, that you can leverage. We have a fantastic environment. We have a great education system. We have access to talent. We have access to capital. I know I'll be killed for saying that, but there is capital and we have access to that. And we have also very good and successful examples that we can leverage. So we are at the stage right now where we kind of have to grow some of the companies that have started and get these really large, exits and examples that people can reference and other startups can reference. But the actual environment to start, baking these startups is here.
Well,
it is happening here in Toronto. You look at Janice Systems back in the day, they exited, they started their own VC fund. The second they were out of their non-compete, they started NextJ, which is killing it.
Exactly.
You got the Dayforce folks who did WorkBrain
and the Ripple
before.
Group. Exactly. It's happening. So it's, that's actually a really good example. It's very much mirroring what's happening in other cities, and it's, it's working.
Well, I know that Mike Williams, General Manager for Economic Development for the City of Toronto, is actually in the audience, and I'm sure he's very pleased to hear your respective response to that question. Let's move to question number 2. What are the strategies to reach out to venture capital, attract R&D, and the human and financial capital that are some of the necessary elements with respect to startup? Janice, would you like to take that?
Yeah, so my perspective is actually from a startup trying to, that's just actually closing a round of finance. But it's been critical again to network, speak on stage, talk with people, and to be very accessible as an entrepreneur, and to be willing at probably any given moment to talk about it. And Mars again, or I imagine other of the incubators are critical in helping, I was an advisor before I was a client, and it's forever the language inside the young entrepreneurs is how are we going to raise capital? If we're not raising revenue, if we're not cash positive, how are we raising capital to exist? I mean, it's a constant state of how do we get there? And I'd love to actually hear from the VCs in the room, because when you're a startup, it's harder to reach the VCs. Well,
I'm going to go to Loudon next, because I know we had some conversation about that behind in the green room, and I'd like you maybe to address this, because that's really interesting, some of the thoughts that you had on this with respect to your experience and your success.
I thought I wasn't allowed to say what I said.
We want it to be controversial.
And, look, I think most companies should not be funded. That's my answer, in part. And I think that there's a self-selection.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
No, literally, I think most investments in startups are poor investments. And I don't think there should be too much pandering to people who simply want to do a startup. Capital is valuable, it's important, it's special. It's not easy to get. So you're not going to get my capital unless it's a good opportunity. I don't really care about ideas, I care about opportunities. So I think funding startups for their own sake is death. However, I think from the startup entrepreneurs that are looking for capital, you got to work hard, you got to fight, and you do exactly what everybody in the panel is doing here today, which is you get out, you tell your story, and you find the opportunity. Forget the idea. Nobody cares about your brilliant idea, floating around up in the sky and making everything go 10 times as fast. But what is the opportunity? And I was telling a story before about a friend of mine from business school. He was Norwegian, and he decided he wanted to meet some billionaires to get funded. So what did he do? And we were joking about it, but it's true. He made a list of 15, and he met 2 of them, and he got hired by 1 of them, and still works with them. And he's done very, very well. So think big, act big, seek the opportunity. Don't expect to get the money handed to you. And when you get it, make sure you deploy it carefully, because it's very valuable.
Terrific. Good insight. Well,
if I could jump in.
Mark, yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
I think that there's a new breed of VC that's come out recently, that's kind of a seed micro VC. So to the first part of your question as to how you reach these people, we are very easy to reach. We are reachable by design. We're online, we're on social networks, we're blogging, we're commenting on people's blogs. I look at our first fund, Montreal Startup. We backed 15 companies. We met with probably 500-700 entrepreneurs. We didn't have an office. We just met in coffee shops. I don't drink coffee anymore. That's how much coffee we had. So we were totally grassroots. We sponsored events. We sponsored startup camps, demo camps. It was very easy to get us. I absolutely agree with Loudon that there's a high bar to getting money, and very few of the things that we look at we fund, but we are absolutely accessible. We are out there to find those unpolished gems. You look at all the biggest successes in the tech world, they are all led by first-time founders who were all nobodies until they became somebodies. Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook was just, a college guy in the dorm room building this, and now look at it. So we are absolutely want to be found and want entrepreneurs to find us.
And sorry, I'd add one thing actually, which is really important. Find people who care. So who cares about a startup in the automotive sector? Who cares? Find someone who cares. Find someone who knows about it and get their support. It doesn't have to be a ton of money. It could be advisory board, could be something. You get support from people who care, and that migrates through to the natural output, which is finding people with more institutional capital, but it takes time. And to tell the story of Al Mann, I don't know if anybody know Al Mann here in the States. He's one of the most successful investors in the medical sphere ever, and I've co-invested with Al. And Al's multi-billionaire. He's top 400 in the US. Al still has to go out and raise money. So, sorry guys, but it never ends. And I see Al up presenting in New York, and I see these 25-year-olds on their BlackBerries going like this while Al's talking. Multi-billionaire, one of the creators of a lot of the great medical inventions on this planet. They're not even listening. too bad. You know, he's not going to cry and complain. He gets up there and he pitches. So it's a long haul, but it's worth it, and the capital is actually there.
Leila, some thoughts on this matter?
I was going to second Mark, but I think it was a great answer.
Yeah.
Okay, great. James?
I'm good with what.
Okay, excellent. So let's move on to our next subject matter. And I'm watching the clock because I know that our audience will have many, many questions. We know network matters, networking as such matters in terms of building startups. But to what extent are they now virtual and vital as such? Do neighborhoods and places still matter? If they do, how can actually city, municipal governments and governments in general, how can they help? And I know that Mayor Woodside, Brad Woodside from Fredericton, is interested in this because we're colleagues from FCM, so I know that he's looking forward to your answers. Who'd like to start?
Yeah, I can start.
Sure.
Well, my perspective on social networks
Yeah.
is very specific. I mean, I grew up in the ad business as a creative director, and I was part of the team in Canada that brought Facebook to Canada and started building social networks in 2006. So almost everything we do is social technology. And what I found early on from the perspective that I come from was every time I link something from a campaign perspective to a physical land activity with an online activation. So every time I mirrored everyday consumer behavior with online behavior, my results were better. And the reason I'm telling this is that I speak, I talk, I write, I do all kinds of things online, I have all kinds of relationships online, yet I still have the physical relationships with people. They're not one or the other, they're both. And I think that it's really important. Physical space doesn't disappear just because you have online relationships, and that extends to every form. It extends to the product we're developing, it extends to the relationships with VCs, it extends to, I mean, I'm crowdsourcing Salesforce information right now, but yet I'm selling physical product in store. So there's no separation. One just augments the other, and every time I link the two, whatever I do is better. So I don't think they separate. Is that?
Okay, anyone else?
I really wish I knew the answer, because one side of me says just please get out of the way in terms of what cities can do. Just get out of the way, keep your taxes down, make things work, please. That's a very strong, inclination. The other side of me is saying pick one or two things that you're really good at, and you find cities are just, for whatever reason, spectacular at different things. Why don't we have all sorts of research centers in Canada about technology related to natural resources? I've never understood that. I mean, we're fantastic at it. We conquer mountains and streams all over the world and find things, but we're naturally good at it. Why not focus on it? Just focus on a couple of things, because trying to create competition with Silicon Valley, well, yes and no, but pick your spots. So I do think, by the way, your question, the first part of the question was, in a virtual world, does it matter? Yes.
And before I go to Mark, but big city, small cities, rural, urban areas, I mean, does that apply with respect to the point of view that you just expressed in terms of?
Pick your spots.
Pick your spots and focus.
At something. You can't boil the ocean, notwithstanding all the concerns about the environment. You can't boil the ocean.
Right.
So everybody has to pick their spots, and they're just natural areas of strength, and people migrate to different regions, partially historical. Why has Montreal got all these fantastic graphic designers? Why is Montreal so fantastic at 3D animation? It actually started in Alberta, and it started with a company that exploded, did great, and then it had a less successful time period. Everybody migrated around, a bunch went to Montreal. University of Montreal started focusing on it. Why? But now Montreal is absolutely spectacular at that, amongst a host of other things. So pick your spots.
Okay, terrific. Mark?
Well, I think there were two parts to your question.
There
One,
were.
kind of whether local networks matter, and two,
That's
what
right.
role municipal governments have to play. So
Yep.
I think that networks are primarily vertical. They're primarily around your industry, but I think, as everyone has made the point, local networks do matter. And so as an entrepreneur, I definitely want to know my peers in town for a variety of reasons, just from sanity checks, because let's face it, it's pretty hard to build a business, so it's good to know people who are doing the same thing. It's great to know people locally to help with hiring, which is one of the biggest challenges that entrepreneurs face. So local networks absolutely do matter. And as for the role of government, I've got mixed feelings, to be honest. I was at the Grow conference in Vancouver 2 years ago, the very first Grow conference, where the mayor of Vancouver got up and kind of put his stamp and said, hey, you know what, technology is really important to us. They had commissioned kind of a pretty slick video about all the startup activity in town. And you know, there is a lot going on in Vancouver. I was at a conference in New York City a couple of weeks ago where I was handed this map of every startup in New York City and this really thick paper about kind of New York's vision for high tech in the city. And that all started with Mayor Bloomberg back in the day saying, hey, this sector is important to us. So there absolutely is a role for government. It comes from the top. It has to come from the mayor. I will say there may be many bureaucrats in the room, and my apologies. Startup people are wary of bureaucrats showing up at events. So when we start seeing a bunch of suits and stuff kind of wandering around, we feel like those events lack credibility, and we move to ones that don't have those people. So government has a role to play, but it's kind of behind the scenes, not frontline.
Okay.
And can I give you a really good example, because you reminded me of something. In Sweden, I remember I can't remember where I was doing, anyway, I was in Stockholm, and they'd set up a group to help young companies build. And stage one was to help them build and communicate with each other and have their finger on the pulse. Step two was how to move to Silicon Valley. And that was paid for by the government.
That's sad.
Why? Does that make sense? Well, it makes sense to me, because they understood they had certain competitive advantages. They understood the companies had to thrive. That was going to be their pathway to the future. And they actually spent government funding on it, and everybody embraced it. They thought it was a great idea, and it worked. And somebody goes to the Valley, they make $1 billion or $2 billion, something filters back. People, money, capital, new ideas. So it's just, there are different approaches and philosophies depending what your strengths are.
Okay, Leila, did you want to add something to that?
I was just going to say that, you know, individuals that are starting companies and running startups are actually smart enough to figure out where their network is and what they need to access that network. And, you know, you go where you need to go. Like in our example, we are in Silicon Valley every month. We are in London, we are in New York, and that's because our clients are there and our network is there. You're not going to discount that. You're not going to simply say, I can thrive and build an organization in a vacuum. That's never going to happen. Okay. If the government was to do anything, particularly in the city of Toronto, is blanket the entire city with Wi-Fi. That would be awesome.
Okay.
Second that.
You know, that would be incredible and a phenomenal support to the entire, you know, startup infrastructure. It's, you know, and bring the city to the next century, pretty much.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to have to bring that to the mayor, and we will definitely work that, because I know that you've indicated the importance of mayors and so on, and I know that Mayor Crombie is here, and he understands that and so on. So let's move on to our next question.
Can we pin him down till he commits to putting in Wi-Fi?
Mayor Crombie can do anything he wants, quite frankly. Let's move on, because I know that time is moving, and I know that the audience must have lots of interesting questions, because we've been rather controversial, I believe.
Absolutely.
Mark wanted to ensure that we were, and I think that we're doing a pretty good job. So the next question is, what is the role, especially being here at Mars, what is the role of incubators such as Mars in startup? And what cities have similar approaches, such as Mars, and at what scales are they operating? I wonder who would like to take that.
Well, since we run an incubator or an accelerator, I'll jump in.
Excellent.
And, you know, incubators are the new black. Everybody seems to have one. And they range from real estate plays, where it's just exchanging kind of office space for a chunk of your company, to things that are very legitimate. And Mars's accelerator is very much a legitimate one. But you know, I would say, first of all, for entrepreneurs, it's very important to work with the right accelerators or incubators, and those ones really are ones that are deeply plugged into the funding ecosystem and can surround those companies with really great mentors and really great access to capital. And unfortunately, it's a minority of accelerators that can truly deliver on that promise. I will say, though, that accelerators are quickly becoming, certainly in the domain where I invest, which is mainly kind of software, that accelerators are becoming the new sort of key filter, where we look for people who go through programs, not specifically our fund, because we run one, so we pick out of our own one, but generally, if I speak about the venture ecosystem generally, Especially in the US, you know, graduates from Techstars and Y Combinator have a very high track record of getting funded. And you know, we're certainly trying to build an accelerator of a similar caliber here. And so I do think they have an important role.
Excellent. Anyone else?
I've spent quite a bit of time in incubators in Singapore, China, Hong Kong. There's actually an interesting one in Hong Kong, been going for a while. I've looked at something that was sort of an incubator in Abu Dhabi, believe it or not. It was an interesting sort of experiment. I've seen a lot of experiments around the planet, and I think it's probably always the same thing. When this building is empty and nobody's here and nothing's turned on, it doesn't really matter much, but it's the people. And so what happens in any incubator, it's about engaging people that are motivated. So hopefully they get out of the Lamborghinis and they go inside, and it does matter if they're physically there. I think one of the things that Mars and the other really great incubators I've seen and accelerators that I've seen do, they do two things. They draw people together and they ask questions. Can't give answers, but they ask a lot of questions. So you know, everybody's here drawn together. Why? Because we're all, you know, asking questions and wrestling with them and hopefully going to find some solutions.
Terrific. Anyone else before we open up?
So,
Janice?
I'm definitely a Mars startup.
Yep.
So I think I've made that clear. I would say mentorship, education, capital, peer network, connections to industry partners have all been things that are critical that I've observed and both participated in and received. And particularly mentorship has been tremendous.
Okay, terrific. A good politician knows when to move ahead. There are two more questions, but it relates to politics and involvement in entrepreneurial development. And I think I've heard from the panel that I think we need to move the politics aside in the political environment. So what I'd like to do now, members of the audience, I would now like to afford you the opportunity to be able to ask questions of our distinguished panelists here. So the floor is actually open, and who's first? There's a gentleman in the back. Okay.
This question is for Mark. Mark, good to see you again.
Hey, Bruce.
The Quebec government has been extraordinarily creative, I guess, in some of the programs they've put together. Can you give us some overview of that? I got a deck from Deloitte the other day, about 50 pages deep. Each one was a different program that they offer. How important to that is that to the ecosystem in Montreal and in the province?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's good and bad sides to taxes in Quebec. You know, as individuals, we have the highest marginal tax rate actually in North America. The good news is that funds a lot of really rich programs. So the core one is SR&ED, so scientific research, experimental development. So that piggybacks the federal program. But when you combine the two together, we can get maybe up to 51 cents on the dollar. For every dollar that we spend on R&D salaries, we get half of it back in tax credits, which is a lot of leverage. We have a multimedia credit. It used to be specific to a part of Old Montreal, but now it's not geographically bound. And they've opened that up a lot. There's a rich film tax credit program that I'm not that familiar with because I don't invest there. There's a lot of kind of young entrepreneur grants that are, some are municipal driven, some are private. The Investissement Québec has, which is the economic development arm of the Quebec government, has some lending and grant programs. They finance tax credits where banks would not. They will fund 50 cents of every dollar that you spend on marketing efforts to promote exports. So there's just so many programs. And you know, the good news is that really does provide leverage to the capital that we as investors provide. Mm-hmm. The bad news is that there are many startups that are the walking dead that would have died a long time ago, but for the subsidies and kind of free or quasi-free money that comes in.
Terrific. So there's a role for government after all.
Absolutely.
I don't think it's fair to say, you know, how many people in here work for the government? Must be at least one. Look, it's crazy to say no role for government. I mean, and I don't think any of the people that invest in startups or work in this area would say that, and it depends where you are geographically. But it's what role, what strengths, you know, what activities. And I know how hard, you're all underpaid and you all work too hard. You ought to quit and start your own companies. Because I think that what happens is, you know, you get a lot of
Municipal
people.
revolt. Awesome.
You get a lot of one way to cut down the burn. But it's true. I mean, there are a lot of wonderful activities that people from the government can do, but it's what you want to do and what you don't want to do. Pick your areas, don't blow too much money on it, and let the private sector do its job. And don't keep the walking dead stumbling around. I mean, that's really a waste of talent and capital. And all those people that stay in these companies that should have shut down years ago are ruining their lives. If they shut them down, they'd be able to move on and do something new and exciting, and they'd be successful because they'd have learned a lot. So
yeah. I call these people lifers, and I actually always tell my startups never to hire anyone who is a lifer because they've lost their competitive edge.
Anyone else wishes to add in? I know that I just noticed my good friend Karen Levivici from Edmonton, Councillor, and also the president of FCM, Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Karen, good to see you, and I know that you're going to take some of these ideas back to FCM as well as to Edmonton, so it's great to see you. There was a lady with a question here, ma'am. The microphone's working its way to you.
Thank you. My question pertains to what you said about taking an idea to an opportunity, and I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit about what universities can do to contribute in bringing the idea to become an opportunity.
Okay, who wants to start with that?
Oh, I'll jump in.
Sure.
You know, I think it really does start with a very kind of practical versus academic orientation inside the university classrooms. And again, to my example earlier about, you know, Stanford, where people are building apps versus learning in textbooks, that's definitely a starting point. It also, you need the universities, the university students need to have access to people who are out there in the real world doing this. So again, at Stanford, venture capitalists, entrepreneurs teach and lecture in the classrooms and mentor people. So there's really strong bridges between the university and the working world. So I find that's really important. If you're working on something that truly has a lot of research behind it, then most universities have some sort of technology transfer office that you can work with that can connect you with the outside world. But if it's not as research intensive, it's really about building strong direct links between the university and the industry that you're part of.
Okay. Leila, answer.
Well, from my perspective, you know, for universities, I do presentations at U of T, for example, and what's really, really important to do is to establish, as Mark said, a relationship between startups and students, so that students can actually start thinking at a very, very, very early stage that building a company, or, you know, solving a problem using technology and basically creating a startup is actually an option, rather than simply thinking about working in, you know, larger companies or banks and what have you. And the best way to do that is to actually give them access to the entrepreneurs that are in their city and other cities, because you can use technology to do that and actually bring them directly to the classroom, talking about what's exciting, what's important, what has been tried, how has it been tried, the failures as well as the successes. So to really just, you know, throw them in that environment and not have them discover it on their own, you know, much later when they are under pressure to figure out what is it that they're going to do and how quickly are they going to do it and where are they going to work. And I think if that happens at the very early stage, and in particular it happens maybe in an environment where they can do something like in a hackathon, so they can actually create an application or something in a day or a weekend, that will probably very likely change what their future and their career ends up being.
Okay, thank you.
Can I make one very specific comment?
Okay.
And I have to say this. Sorry, I have to. Intellectual property. Universities develop intellectual property day in, day out. Protect it, monetize it, do the right thing. Most universities don't.
Okay, thank you. Elsa, is there a question on this side?
Just bringing this conversation back to the city, in particular, obviously the unique opportunity here in Toronto, but it's true in Montreal and many other Canadian cities, of hugely diverse population, children of immigrants now coming through our university system. And with some of our traditional markets where startups used to get their first customers or their capital or their validation being more stuck, do you see any opportunities or specific suggestions of how we can help our startups find the early traction in emerging markets when many of our traditional networks around startups are really not targeting those markets today. Any unique success stories you've seen or suggestions where City of Toronto can really use its diaspora networks to create a sort of a new generation of global traders?
Who wants to take that?
I have some thoughts on
Mark?
that. And you know, very often I see entrepreneurs when they've captured 0.01% of the market that they're in now, thinking about how to get into new markets. And I remind them to focus pretty strongly on the market that they're in and keep winning it. So I would actually discourage startups from going into faraway markets unless they have strong links in those markets. So if they come from those markets and can build connections and truly have what it takes to succeed in those markets, then that's great. But you know, it's really hard as a young company to be an inch thick and a mile wide. You know, you can't be in a bunch of different places. You need to be really focused. If you're, especially in a technology realm, you need to do generally one thing extremely well, and you need to be very close to your customers. And you know, I find that's hard to do unless you really have strong links to the market that your customers are in. Now, I will say, you know, from a Canadian perspective, and again linking that to technology, that Canadian customers tend to not adopt technology as fast as American customers. And so for the companies that I'm involved in, the core market is usually the US, not Canada. But we don't think about going further afield than the US for a very long period of time.
Okay, Loudon, do you want to add to that?
Well, two things. One is we had an interesting experience back at Softimage. It was a 3D animation software company. And we were afraid to go to the US because everybody was smarter and richer and faster. And so, and literally, they were big. Everybody was very intimidating. So we first went to France because we found that people adopted technology more quickly. And when we said it was easy to use and powerful, they were interested. If we said it was easy to use and powerful in the States, they said, oh, it can't be very powerful. It's too easy to use. So we went first to France, and went to Italy, then we went to Germany, then England, then we went to Japan, and then we went to the US when we had about 15 million in sales. And we didn't have a single sale in Canada, by the way. CBC turned us down. But we found kind of for us, in a very particular area, it worked. And people were willing to listen to what we had to say, where we just couldn't go to the US. So it really depends on the market. So I don't know how cities can do that, apart from, I mean, one of our rules is that we don't let companies fly anywhere unless someone else pays. So if they want to fly off to you know, South America, and they want you to pay for it because they want to go explore some crazy opportunity, forget it. If a customer will pay for it, that's different. So I don't know what the cities can do, apart from what the Swedes do, which is help people leave Sweden. But it seems to work, and they go back.
Thanks, Loudon. Leila, did you want to add to that?
I was just going to say, I'm going to take the other side of this, you know, position, because, for example, for us, we have one client in Canada. All our other clients are in the US, in France, in Germany. They're not local. So not only did we have to go to them, you know, some of them came to us, we went to them, but with technology today, like, I don't have to pay a $3,000 ticket to get in front of my potential customer and my customer. I mean, they can be completely immersed in the technology that we are trying to demo and sell, you know, simply by using technology. There's no real reason to get on the plane to actually get close to a customer. Of course, to sign a deal or to, you know, transact, you know, something that's fairly large, you have to get in front of your customer. But really, to develop the relationship, understand the market, you can actually do that locally. Sometimes you have to leave. I mean, we are on planes all the time. But for most startups, I mean, at least successful ones and the ones that end up capturing a chunk of a market, you can't do that locally. You know, Canada is a tiny country, and your market is global, and you're competing globally. You can't sit here and say, they will come to me. So I agree that you might be, you know, careful, and I agree that perhaps you have to validate getting on a plane, but at the end of the day, you're hustling and you're doing that outside of your city and outside of your country. And I'm not really sure what the role of a government could be. I mean, I know Canada has great export support programs for, you know, startups and companies that wish to explore, you know, opportunities outside. I don't know how very localized that could be, but our markets are not local.
Okay, thank you. Janice, do you want to add
I
to
think
that?
I echo what you're saying, Leila. I mean, I don't I'm happy to get on a plane to go get business anywhere. I mean, I'm a startup. We're launching 16 communities for a carrier in the U.S. The size of the volume of what that means to us versus what I could do here, it just does, like, what difference does it make where I make my money? I'm building it here. I'm making it wherever I need to make it.
So it's all a matter of perspective.
Yeah.
Terrific. Before I go to Mayor Woodside, I'd like to just also acknowledge my colleague and councillor and vice chair of the Economic Development Committee, Councillor Carroll. Councillor Carroll, great to see you. Thank you. Mayor Woodside, great to see you in Toronto, and I will give you, I think, the last question, unless I have one more from this side. I know that our time is fast approaching an end, but no? Okay, no problem. Is there one final question from the audience that someone is just burning to ask that final question? We have 30 seconds left, and I see no final questions.
I
was just going to ask that if you wanted to do a final round with respect to the panel. I'll start with Loudon
I'd just
first.
like to thank you, because a lot of people work very hard to try and build better cities and better places for all of us, so thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Leila?
I'd like to say if there is anyone in the audience today sitting and wondering if they should build a startup or if they should even entertain the idea of, doing one, the answer should really be yes. Do it. Fail if you fail. Succeed if you succeed, but do it. Don't sit and wonder.
Thank you. Janice?
I think I echo that. Do it. Let's just jump in and run.
You know,
Mark.
I was reading Profit Magazine on the flight on the way down here, in their top 200 most profitable companies, and those 200 companies created 14,936 jobs. So I just would say it's all about entrepreneurship, and if there's anything, whatever role you play in the ecosystem, support entrepreneurship and help entrepreneurs create those jobs.
Well, I think that I'd like to say that I'm very appreciative of the consideration in terms of focusing on jobs, because that's a big part of what we do, and Councillor Carroll will acknowledge that, and others in terms of the City of Toronto. We want to create the jobs, we want to create opportunities and so on. I think that when people have jobs, many of the challenges that we see that occurs in and around not only our city but expanding globally, it prevents people from engaging in some of the very negative impactful things that occurs in communities and so on. So
money helps.
Pardon me, money helps, absolutely. It's the key to success. Panelists, it is in fact been my great pleasure to sit with you, to hear from you, and I know that the audience appreciated the key insight and informative information that you've conveyed. Ladies and gentlemen, that I believe concludes our session of this particular amazing, innovative city panel. So thank you all very much, and thank you, panelists.